Over the course of time, God has always sought those who would answer His call to share the goodness, the peace, and the love that flows from His presence. Though many have ignored this mandate, two in particular did not, and thus our story begins. Dorothy Luscombe became a successful businesswoman in Ocala, Florida. So successful that with her talent and ideas, she began writing articles for the New York Times and hosting and appearing on the ABC television network. All was going well until one day, things began to unravel. Divorce, then loss of business, and financial pressure began to tear at this once successful woman. Determined to allow her fighting spirit to come forth, Dorothy began to return to her roots that her mother and father had laid so diligently within her, the love of God. With one God encounter after the other, Dorothy began to break free from the bondage that tragedy had brought. Still facing stout issues monetarily, Dorothy began working diligently on her own and with other ministries in Daytona Beach, Florida, to feed the homeless natural food as well as spiritual. Time after time, Dorothy would have to believe God for money and just enough gas to make it the hour-and-a-half drive from Ocala to Daytona Beach, Florida, in order to answer the tug on her heart to reach the hurting of the world. In more ways than one, God was setting Dorothy up through these outreaches for the rest of her life. For it was during this time that Dorothy would meet a radical Christian man that God would use to walk with her to fulfill the passion of touching the world. Russell Spalding had a very unique life, to say the least, always looking for an adventure. Through his teenage years, drugs and alcohol began to play a major part in Russell's life. The drugs and alcohol led to his running away and participating in such activities as grand theft auto and breaking and entering. Through it all, unknowingly to him, Russell's greatest adventure was still ahead of him. Having gone through AA and coming to the end of what the world had to offer, Russell found himself empty and in need of real answers. So one afternoon, while riding his bike and crashing on the street, he called out to God with his whole heart. And thus in 1986, he committed his life wholeheartedly to God. After wondering for a time, Russell heard of and got involved in Street Reach in Daytona, Florida. He teamed up with fellow believers to touch the lost and the hurting on the streets. There he met a lady who had a similar passion to touch the lost, Dorothy Luscombe. Dorothy and Russell frequently found themselves on the same outreach teams, boldly proclaiming God's love and grace. This dynamic duo passionately lit up the streets of Daytona Beach, Florida, touching lives in so many ways. With a desire to do more, Dorothy entered into a 40-day fast to seek God's heart for her next step. On that fast, God instructed her to begin a crosswalk from Florida to Washington, D.C. With word getting out of Dorothy's mandate, the Lord laid it upon Russell's heart to walk with her, thus beginning a journey that would last 8 years, covering the north, south, east, and west of the United States. Through this walk, thousands were touched, saved, and changed. Countless miracles experienced, and thousands of miles traveled. While touching one of the largest homeless populations in Portland, Oregon, Dorothy and Russell founded Crosswalk Ministries and Street Reach Ministries of Oregon, which continue to touch hundreds of those in need in the city of Portland. Drawing on the experience gained from Dorothy's days at ABC and Russell's expertise in construction, they played a vital role in the expansion of Christian television across America, helping in such states as Louisiana, Oregon, South Carolina, New Mexico, and many others, not knowing that at the time they were sowing towards their own future. During their time of walking across America, the couple fell in love. After the Lord speaking to both of their hearts, it was settled. Dorothy and Russell wed on October the 28th, 1988 in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. The Crosswalk ministry of the Spaldings continued for 8 solid years. But before they could begin their 9th year, the Lord spoke to them concerning raising up a television station in Augusta, Georgia. And the rest is history. In July of 1995, an open house took place to introduce what would become Watchmen Broadcasting to the CSRA. Following that night, TV 36 would hit the airways August 8, 1995, setting up the Augusta area for a flood of Christian programming which continues to this day. 15 years later, miracle after miracle has taken place before the very eyes of the CSRA, showing God's faithfulness and grace. All the salvation and life-changing ministry began years ago with 2 people that decided to heed God's call to touch the world.